Myślę, że powoli możemy zaczynać.
I believe
Witam
that we may
Państwa bardzo
start
serdecznie
shortly.
na
Welcome very
telekonferencji
cordially
spółki
at the
Celon Pharma.
teleconference hosted by
Nowy rok
Celon
zaczynamy
Pharma.
energicznie. Pretekstem do
We are
naszego dzisiejszego spotkania są
getting into the
opublikowane
new
w
year
piątek wyniki
with our
badania
energy
drugiej
app.
fazy
The reason for this
esketaminy
meeting is
w
phase two
depresji
trial of
dwubiegunowej. Szanowni Państwo, nasze
treatment
dzisiejsze
for
spotkanie będzie miało
treatment-resistant
kilka
bipolar
części.
depression.
Pierwsza
Our
to część
meeting
prezentacyjna,
will have two
następnie przejdziemy
parts.
do sesji
First, we are
pytań.
going to start with the
Ja uprzejmie
presentation,
proszę, żeby
and
Państwo
after
w tej
that, we are
części
going to have
prezentacyjnej
an
wyciszyli
Q&A.
mikrofony po swojej stronie. Udostępnimy oczywiście
Please
Państwu
keep your
głos
mics
w sesji
muted,
pytań.
and we
Nasze
will
spotkanie będzie
unmute you during the
rejestrowane,
Q&A
będzie
session. This
możliwość
meeting will be
odsłuchania go
recorded, and
na
therefore
naszej
you will be
stronie
able to listen
internetowej.
to it again at
Jest
our
ono oczywiście
website.
w wersji prezentacyjnej oraz słownie objęte
The
określonymi
presentation
zastrzeżeniami
is
prawnymi,
subject
także
to legal
bardzo proszę,
disclaimer,
zachęcam Państwa do
and
zapoznania
I
się z
encourage
nimi.
you to review
A z nami
our
są
disclaimers.
dzisiaj
Today,
w imieniu
our
spółki
company is
dwie osoby.
represented by
Jest to
two
Sylwia
people,
Janowska, lider
Sylwia
rozwoju
Janowska,
klinicznego
Clinical
grupy
Development
badawczej
Leader of
Neuropsychiatria
Neuropsychiatry
i prezes
Research
zarządu,
Group, and
osoba
our CEO,
nadzorująca część badawczo
who's
rozwojową w naszej
also
spółce, pan
supervising
prezes
R&D in the
Maciej Wieczorek.
company,
Nazywam się Małgorzata
Mr. Maciej
Siewierska, reprezentuję
Wieczorek.
dział relacji
Myself,
inwestorskich. Będę miała
my
wielką
name is
przyjemność dla
Małgorzata
Państwa
Siewierska, and I
prowadzić i moderować
represent
dzisiejsze
Investor
spotkanie.
Relations. I will be
Myślę, że
moderating this
możemy
meeting.
zaczynać. Zasady
I
sesji
believe
pytań
that we
podam
may
po części
start.
prezentacyjnej.
The
Panie
Q&A
prezesie,
session will be
bardzo
explained
proszę.
after the presentation.
Dziękuję Małgosiu, witam Państwa serdecznie.
Thank you.
Życzę wszystkiego najlepszego.
Welcome everyone, and
My
I
mamy dla
wish you
Państwa
very
prezent w
successful
postaci
New Year.
dzisiejszych,
Today we have
Państwu
a small gift for
przedstawimy.
you, namely the
Nasza
readouts
prezentacja
of
trwa
our
15
trial.
minut.
The
Zapraszam
presentation
tutaj
will
Sylwię.
take
Sylwia jest osobą,
a dozen
która
of minutes or
od początku
so.
brała udział w
Sylvia,
projektowaniu
who's been involved in
między
this
innymi tego badania
study
całego
from the very
programu,
beginning, is
esketaminy. Więc
with
wprowadzi
us
Państwa
today, and she
w
will walk you
tematy
through
medyczne,
the
depresję
medical topic
dwubiegunową,
of
ale też powie Państwu, w jaki sposób
bipolar
zrobiły te
depression, and she will
badanie,
explain
co chcieliśmy w tym badaniu
how the
uzyskać.
study was
Dalej
designed
ja
and what we
pokażę
expected
Państwu
to get from it.
wyniki zarówno naszego
I will
produktu, ale
take
też
over to explain the
będę chciał
results
Państwu pokazać szerszą
in terms of the
perspektywę,
product
jakie
and in
wyniki
terms
mają
of
wśród innych leków, które są dopuszczone do
the
obrotu
comparison to other
dwubiegunowych.
therapeutic
Sylwia, proszę bardzo.
agents that have been approved for bipolar depression treatment.
Ja tylko coś.
Sylvia, over to you.
Dzień dobry
Good
Państwu.
morning, everyone.
Zacznijmy może od
Let me start
temat
with a
samej
short
choroby.
description of the
Choroba
disease.
afektywna dwubiegunowa jest
The
przewlekłym
bipolar
zaburzeniem
disease
psychicznym
is
i
a
jednym z
chronic
najpoważniejszych, które
psychiatric
dotyka
disorder,
ponad
one of
2%
the
światowej
most severe,
populacji.
and it affects
Charakteryzuje
more
się
than
ona
2%
dużą
of the
nawrotownością
global
kolejnych epizodów o
population.
podwyższonym nastroju.
It is a
Wtedy mówimy o
reoccurring
manii,
disease that
hipomanii,
comes
jeżeli
in
to
the
nasilenie
mania
białka jest
or
mniejsze,
hypomania
i
episodes,
epizodów o obniżonym
followed
nastroju, wtedy
by
mówimy o epizodach
depressive
Epizody maniakalne
episodes.
trwają
The
zwykle
maniac
krócej, natomiast
mania
epizody depresji
episodes
potrafią trwać
usually are
bardzo
shorter,
długo
while
i
the
szacuje się,
depressive
że
episodes
okresy
take much
depresji
longer.
pacjenta
It is
zajmują
estimated that the
około
depressive
70%
estimates
czasu
account for
trwania
80% of the
choroby.
disease
Ponadto
duration.
pacjenci z chorobą
In
afektywną
addition to that, the
dwubiegunową mają
patients
zwiększone
with the
ryzyko
affected
chorób
bipolar disease have a
towarzyszących,
higher
takich jak
risk of
choroby sercowo-naczyniowe,
other
otyłość,
disorders such as
cukrzyca
cardiovascular
czy
diseases,
zespół
obesity,
metaboliczny.
diabetes, or
Mają również
metabolic
zwiększone ryzyko
syndrome.
samobójstw,
They
bo
also
6 do
have
7% pacjentów
higher
popełnia samobójstwo.
suicide rates. 6 to 7% of such patients commit suicide.
Sprowadza się ono do długotrwałego
Treatment
przyjmowania odpowiednich leków,
involves
tak zwanych leków
long-term
neurochemicznych, które stabilizują
therapy
zaburzenia
with
nastroju.
mood
Natomiast pomimo
stabilizers.
tego, że epizody
But
depresji
despite the
przeważają,
fact that
to
depressive
jednak,
episodes
ilość
prevail,
dostępnych terapii
the
jest
number
bardzo
of the
ograniczona.
available
Dosłownie
approved
kilka leków
treatments
jest
is very limited.
zarejestrowanych
There are
w
very few
wskazaniu, kilka dodatkowych
agents that
ma
are
wykazaną
approved for
efektywność
this
kliniczną, natomiast tej
indication.
rejestracji w
There are
leczeniu
some
depresji
others that
nie
have
ma.
been proven efficacious
I
but
nie
have
dość,
not
że
been
tych
registered
terapii w
yet.
leczeniu depresji
So
dwubiegunowej jest tak
there is a
mało,
small
to
number of
jeszcze dość
treatments
często
available
zawodzą
for
one
bipolar
pacjentów
depression, and
i
many
nie
times
wykazują
patients fail to
zadowalającego efektu
respond
terapeutycznego.
adequately.
Sugeruje się, że
It
częstość
is suggested
niepowodzeń
that
terapii w depresji dwubiegunowej jest nawet
failure
większa niż w depresji
rates are
jednobiegunowej.
higher for bipolar
Nie istnieje
depression
niestety
than for
oficjalna
unipolar depression.
definicja lekoopornej
Unfortunately,
depresji
there is no
dwubiegunowej, natomiast
consensus on the
definicja,
definition of
która
treatment-resistant
w
bipolar
dokumentacji
depression,
jest dość podobna
and the
do
definition
definicji
that is
lekoopornej depresji
somehow
jednobiegunowej.
accepted
Mówimy,
is
że
similar to the
pacjenta można
definition of
uznać za
unipolar depression.
lekoopornego
So the
I jeżeli
patient
miał brak odpowiedzi, czy odpowiedź
is treatment
nieadekwatną,
resistant if
niewystarczającą na
he
minimum
or she
2
had
raty
an inadequate
farmakologiczne.
response
Przy czym w
to
depresji
at least
dwubiegunowej
two
te terapie
different
farmakologiczne są
treatment
dość
trials.
dokładnie
In case of the
określone, są
unipolar
konkretne
treatment,
rekomendacje,
we
jakie to
have
powinny
a
być
very
leki, czy
clear
powinny one być brane w
situation. We
monoterapii, czy w
know what
kombinacji z
kind
innymi
of
lekami, czy
agents
nawet w
should
jakiej
be
kolejności te
taken and
terapie
in what
powinny się odbywać.
combination and what should be the
Przechodząc do
sequence
naszego
of
badania,
the
to w
therapy.
skrócie jak ono było zaplanowane,
Now,
było to
speaking of
badanie
our
kliniczne fazy
study, it
drugiej,
was a
badanie
phase
wieloośrodkowe,
2
randomizowane, podwójnie
trial,
zaślepione i z kontrolą
multi-center,
placebo. Co to
double-blind,
oznacza? To dokładnie to, że
placebo-controlled.
88
We
pacjentów
had
zostało
88
równomiernie i losowo
patients who were
przydzielonych do jednego z
randomly,
4 ramion,
equally
do ramienia placebo lub
allocated
jednego z
to
3 ramion otrzymujących
either placebo
esketaminę w
arm
dawce
or one of the
24,
three
36 lub 48
agent
mg.
arms
I
for
zarówno pacjent, jak
esketamine
i
of
lekarz nie
24
wiedzieli,
dose or
które z
36 or
tych ramion,
48
do
dose.
których
Neither the
z tych ramion
patient
pacjent
nor
trafił.
doctor
Zarówno placebo, jak i
knew which
esketamina
arm they
były
were
przyjmowane
allocated to.
dziennie,
Both placebo and
dodatkowo do leków
esketamine were
normotonicznych, które
taken
brali pacjenci, na które
by
nie mieli
inhalation,
odpowiedzi
in addition to
klinicznej.
the mood
Każdy pacjent
stabilizers
cztery
that they
dawki
didn't
w przeciągu
respond
3
to.
tygodni,
Each
dwie
patient
dawki
took
na
4
tydzień.
doses,
Po tym
2
okresie
doses per
trwa
week.
tak zwana
After
faza
that, we had
obserwacyjna
a
jeszcze kolejnych 6
6-week
tygodni.
of a
Jeżeli
follow-up
chodzi o
phase.
podstawową ocenę
In
efektywności
terms
w
of
badaniu,
the
czyli tak zwany
primary
pierwszorzędowy punkt
endpoint,
końcowy,
which is the
to jest to
basic
nasilenie,
assessment of
zmniejszenie się
efficacy.
objawów depresji
Here
na
we
końcu, po 2
were looking
tygodniach,
for the
do
increased or
stanu, który był na
decreased
początku
symptoms of
badania.
depression
I mierzone
compared to the
jest to za
baseline.
pomocą różnicy
And this is
punktów w skali
measured
MADRS,
by the
czyli
change
podstawowej skali
in the
psychiatrycznej
points on
używanej w celu
MADRS
oceny nasilenia
scale,
objawów
which
depresji.
is the
Objawów
basic
drugorzędnych,
psychiatric scale for
w
evaluation
badaniu
of
mamy
depression.
wiele. Takie
There are
najistotniejsze
many
to jest
key
ocena
secondary
odpowiedzi, czy
endpoints.
wyniki
The most
klinicznej. Oczywiście ocena
important involve
bezpieczeństwa pod
response,
każdym
remission,
kątem i
safety,
analiza
and
farmakokinetyczna esketaminów.
pharmacokinetics analysis.
Patrząc już na same wyniki, czy na
Now,
same
looking
badanie
at
pacjentów, którzy wzięli
the
w nim
study,
udział, to byli to pacjenci
we had
dorośli, w
adult
przedziale
patients
18-65 lat,
between
którzy
18
mieli
and 60 years of
zdiagnozowaną
age.
depresję
They were
dwubiegunową.
diagnosed with
Oczywiście
bipolar
musiała być ona
depression, and
uznana
obviously
za
they
depresję
had to be
lekopolną.
considered
W badaniu
treatment
przeważały
resistant.
kobiety i większość pacjentów
Women
miała
prevailed in the
typ
patient
choroby afektywnej
population.
dwubiegunowej
Most of them
pierwszy. Natomiast
were
jak widzicie Państwo w tabeli, która zawiera dane
cycle
demograficzne
1 of the
pacjentów, to
bipolar
byli oni równomiernie
depression.
przydzieleni
And when you look at the
do
table, you see
każdego
that
z
we have
ramion pod
equal
względem
distribution
wieku,
between the
płci,
arms
BMI czy
in
typu
terms of the
choroby.
gender,
I podobnie,
BMI,
jeżeli
or
chodzi o
type of the
wartości
disease.
początkowe w skalach, tu w skali MADRS,
And
skali depresji,
the
czy w skali
baseline
depresji,
values
skali
were on
Hamiltona,
the MADRS
w skali
scale or
IDRS-MRS,
HDRS
mierzącej nasilenie objawów manii.
scale.
Również te punkty
The
pomiędzy
scores
ramienami były,
between the
równomiernie
different arms
wyrównane.
were
No i
equally
patrząc na
distributed.
najważniejszą skalę, czyli skalę
Now, when
MADRS,
we look at
to
the
średni
MADRS
wynik
scale,
w
which is
każdym
most
ramieniu był trochę
important,
powyżej
the
28
average
punktów.
result was
Natomiast jak on się
above
zmienił i jakie
28
były wyniki, to przekazuję
points.
panu
And
profesorowi.
now our CEO will explain the actual changes in the MADRS
Dziękuję
reading.
bardzo, Sylwia.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Więc mamy w tej chwili
Right now, we are looking at the most important slide, which shows the primary endpoint. Let me explain what it means. On your left, you see the change as compared to the baseline value. And this is the change on the MADRS total score for placebo group and for the group of 3 doses, 24 milligrams, 36 and 48 milligrams. And as you can tell, the change in total score was statistically significant. The differences increased together with the dose. And statistical significance is quite sizable for those who have not been using statistics much. Let me explain that when p is less than 0.005, we have statistically significant change. And in this case, we meet the criterion. So we have a highly significant change, especially for the largest dose, where the difference is over 8 points on MADRS scale. Detailed statistics are in the table on the right, where we have a difference of the mean compared to the baseline. This is arithmetic average, and the so-called LS least square mean, which is the mean resulting from the standard analysis. And as you can see, the parameters, there are sizable differences. So it's statistically significant, and on top of it, what is important and which shows the effect size, because something can be statistically significant, but the effect size is not that great, so then the benefit is not that sizable. But here, let's have a look at the Cohen's d calculation effect size, and when the effect size is 0.3 is small, 0.5, 0.6 is medium, and above 0.8 is the large effect size. And here we have above 1. In our case, we have large for the small and medium size, and very large for the largest, for the high dose, which is 1.4, and which is rarely seen in agents approved for depression treatment. I haven't seen it for unipolar depression yet. So we have significant results whenever we look at the primary endpoints. And it's also important to say that we will see the trend where the effect increases with the dose. In addition to the primary endpoint, it is desirable to show other supporting endpoints that support credibility of the results. Myself, I like to look at the response and remission. Response is defined as a reduction by at least 50% of all the depression symptoms measured on the MADRS scale. So this is the chart that is first on your left. We see that a large part of patients show the response, nearly 40%, 50%, and 60%, and with the doses of 40, 24, 60, 36, and 48 milligrams. The numbers above are the differences compared to placebo. In the placebo group, we also seen some response on the level of 20%. So between 25 and 45 more patients than in the placebo arm responded to the treatment. And something that many doctors consider to be most important, that is remission, namely the condition where this patient shows no symptoms. And we defined that as achieving MADRS total score equal or below 10 points. In our case, remission was between 30 and 50%. And again, the numbers above the bars show how many more patients had remission compared to the patients in the placebo arm. So the results are very convincing. When you review literature, you can rarely find such strong results that show a visible difference between the actual results and placebo. In most cases, the benefit grows over time. And another scale, which is also used as a supporting tool, Hamilton Depression Rating Scale, it is also fairly often found in the literature. And here we've also observed a strong statistically significant effect, which support the robust effect of our agent. So we have a full picture of efficacy of our product demonstrated by the primary endpoint and the key secondary points. And we need to remember that no of the agents that have been so far approved by FDA had indication for treatment-resistant bipolar depression. As we heard, there is no consensus on the definition on the TR bipolar depression, but please take a note and see that in many studies that were conducted for lurasidone or cariprazine, patients that showed resistance were excluded from trials. So patients who were enrolled in these trials were either naive, which means that previously they have not taken any medication, or patients that have already been on a therapy but failed only one therapy line. So if we compare the primary endpoint, so improvement between the active treatment and placebo on MADRS scale at day 14, the differences in our study were between 6 and 8 units. In most agents, it was 4-6 units for olanzapine or quetiapine, and in terms of recently approved agents, the differences were much lower, approximately 2 units. I show cariprazine study that was the phase 2 trial, and LA was phase 3 trial. So we see that there is a demonstrable benefit that is higher than what we've observed in case of approved agents for bipolar depression. And again, in case of the approved agents, they were tested on the least resistant patients. Now, how does that compare to our response? Response meaning that reduction on MADRS scale was 50% or higher, while remission was defined as MADRS score at 10 or under 10 points. In case of our product, between 20 plus and 40, over 40% of patients showed response. In case of the remission, it was 33 to 36%. The response rate and remission rates at week 2 or at study endpoint was lower in the compared agents. We were not always able to find exact comparative data. Therefore, we either refer to week 2 or week 6 or 8, so the study endpoint, but usually the remission and response rates increase over time. So the presentation of our results is actually very conservative, and it really demonstrates the robust effect of our agent as compared to the approved therapeutics. So we compare favorably to whatever has been approved for use. Well, there is always a flip side of each medication. And the other side, which is always critical in case of drugs, it's a safety profile. In case of the esketamine, the thing that we always are conscious about is possible serious side effects. Now, let me start with the most important things. In case of the safety profile, so far we have not observed any deaths, any serious side effects, no suicide. It is important to note that there was no discontinuations due to adverse events. In many trials, we see numerous discontinuations, despite the fact that the safety profile seems to be okay. But a discontinuation is often a result of something that cannot be quantified in the table, but nevertheless it affects the patient's well-being. And another risk factor that we are concerned about was mania. A few years ago, it actually raised fear whenever esketamine was to be used in bipolar depression treatment, but we've seen no mania induction, and we have not observed sedation, while sedation was often mentioned in Spravato publications. Spravato is our potential competitor. And the percentage of patients with adverse events has not been growing with the dose. As you can tell, 27% of placebo patients had some adverse events, 39% of those taking the lowest dose of esketamine, and 23% for the medium dose, and 27% for the highest dose. Adverse events similar as for unipolar depression. Dizziness that show the highest rate in case of the smallest dose. Now, another adverse events such as feeling abnormal or euphoric mood, they were observed more often on active treatment as compared to placebo. However, they were mild, very mild in intensity. No serious adverse events recorded. Dissociation, it was the focus of this study. As you may remember, in unipolar depression study, the dissociation was declining over time. After the 4th dose, we had substantial decline, while in the 45th minute, we were reaching the peak. And a similar profile was observed in this study. The dissociation was dose dependent. With the first dose, it was between 5 to 7 units at 45th minute, where it was declining after the second administration. And starting from day 8, we had a stable situation at 4 score. 4 is like a borderline because it is assumed that 4 on Katz's dissociation scale is a standard value. And please be mindful that even for placebo, we were actually observing some dissociation after the first dose, and then we've seen the decline. When we compare our results with Spravato results, at least numerically, we are slightly below what we have seen in the phase 3 study of Spravato. They were starting at 8.4 points after the first administration, and then we've seen a similar declining profile. Perhaps in our case, we reached the 4-unit level faster than in case of Spravato, where they were going down to 4 after 2 weeks of the trial. But it's too early to reach final conclusions on such analysis. So that was the presentation that we wanted to share with you. These are the most recent results. We are currently continuing our analysis. Therefore, we are going to have more detailed data in the future. We also continue the 6-week follow-up, which will tell us how long the remission is maintained over the period of 6 weeks. And just as a reminder, Falkieri and how it compares to Spravato, which is the only agent that contains esketamine and was approved for treatment. Our agent comes in a different form. It's a dry powder inhaler, while Spravato is administered intranasally. Well, the first trials showed that our pharmacokinetics seems to be more predictable as compared to the intranasal administration. And this is a good thing because it may give us a more predictable clinical profile of the agent and more predictable efficacy or anticipated safety of the product. As compared to Spravato, we are developing our agent for two indications: treatment-resistant unipolar depression and bipolar depression. And this is a unique feature that we're having since Spravato has not been developed for the bipolar depression treatment. Our drug should be a good therapy for the bipolar depression, and it seems that the scale and the effect size may turn out to be higher for the bipolar depression than unipolar depression. Obviously, at this point, this is strictly a hypothesis since we are still facing phase 3 trial. And the important thing, namely safety, all researchers were concerned about esketamine treatment because of the potential risks that may lead to the poor tolerability of the product. However, the study proved that we should not be that much concerned about the safety of the developed agent. Another thing that is important to mention is that we are using technologies that reduce the risk of misuse of the product when administered at home settings. We want to administer our product in the clinic during the acute phase, the same way as Spravato is administered, but during the maintenance phase, it should be approved for at-home administration. So there is a number of benefits and differences that set us apart from Spravato. So this is the profile that we expect to have for our product. Now, to summarize, we see substantial and significant improvement with certain dose-dependent trend in the patients that show resistance to treatment of bipolar depression. We met primary endpoint, which is a highly statistical significant improvement on MADRS versus placebo at week 2. The drug was well tolerated and it had a stable safety profile, which was consistent with the previously completed study. So what's coming up next? We are going for the 6-week follow-up. The majority of patients have already completed the follow-up, but the patients that were recruited at the end of the last year continue their follow-up phase. And that should be completed within the next few weeks. So in 8 or to 12 weeks, we should be able to get back to you and show a more complete data set. And we should be able to answer the fundamental question, namely how long the benefits of this treatment are maintained. From the regulatory and commercial point of view, the readouts are very favorable. Right after this meeting, we are going to start preparing our files for FDA and EMA to the regulators, so that we may start discussions or present our design of the phase 3 trial program. Commercial benefits? Well, our partners and ourselves were looking forward to the results of this study. As we know, the bipolar depression represents a greater market than unipolar depression because there are very few therapy lines approved for this indication, and on top of it, the competition is not that stringent as in the case of the unipolar depression. And the disease has a very negative course in many patients, and there is a large unmet need in this particular area. So that would complete our presentation, and we are ready for your questions. Thank you. Now we are open a Q&A session. Our chat window is open for you. If you would like to voice your question, please raise your hand or let us know through the chat, and we will ask you to raise your question. We've also got some questions by email, and if you believe that your questions have not been addressed during the presentation, please let us know. What kind of information would you like to receive as an addition to what we've had so far? How many people are we going to recruit for phase 3 trial? At this point, we don't know for sure. However, the calculation that we have made so far and our preliminary discussions with the regulators indicate that we should have 2 phase 3 studies between 200 and 200 plus patients in each study. So this is something that is still coming up. It should be estimated that for each indication we should have phase 3 program with 400 to 600 patients. There is a request for an update of meetings with FDA and EMA, when the meetings can be scheduled and when phase 3 study can be launched realistically. Well, this is an administrative procedure, if you will, which means that currently we are preparing the documentation. We are going to file it with the regulators. And once the filing is done, the regulator has 60 days to schedule the meeting. So within the next 2 to 3 months, we should be able to have such meetings in place. Obviously, we are in the midst of the pandemic, which means that most of the meetings are currently virtual. I'm not sure how the pandemic has affected administrative procedures with the regulators, but it appears that with the results that we are having today, the procedure should be initiated fairly soon. Phase 3 study will be done with our partner. This is what we would like to accomplish. So it would be best if our partner participated with the regulatory discussions. So the whole thing regarding the active partner is very important. And on top of it, we need to fine-tune all the regulatory details. As you know, for the past 18 months, I've been saying that end of Q2 2021 would be a desirable moment to launch phase 3 study. Whether it's going to be right on target or whether it would be a bit later, time will show. First, we have to have everything in place. So, in a sense, another question has been already answered, so let me move on to the next question. What is the impact of your results on the value of the partnering arrangement? Obviously, this is the kind of question that I may not answer. Our discussions on partnering are in process, and you will be informed about the results in due course. Our goal is to find a partner who's going to be a long-term partner for our company, who will be able to take the adequate care of the product. So we need to have someone who has experience with such therapies, who is able to focus on the product, and who's able to come up with the substantial financial input. So does it mean that the partnering agreement can be signed in Q1? Well, once the agreement is signed, we will communicate it promptly. Does your company intend to manufacture Falkieri? This is the baseline assumption. This is not an easy product. It
do
it
rozwoju,
contains
wykorzystuje technologię proszku.
complex technology of inhalation
Tak jak
powder.
Państwu informowaliśmy, my
As we have already
kapitalizujemy nasze
informed you, we are
10-letnie
capitalizing our
doświadczenie w zakresie
10-year
rozwoju
experience with the
Posiadamy
development
zarówno
of such
laboratorium, jak i
products.
bardzo
We have a
nowoczesny
lab
zakład
and a very modern
wytwarzający
manufacturing facility that
W związku
manufactures
z tym,
such inhalation
być może jak
devices.
produkt będzie na rynku,
Perhaps
gdzieś tam w perspektywie
once the product is on the market,
będziemy
for
widzieli potrzebę
logistic
laboratoriowego
reasons, we
wytwarzania
may
gdzieś tam części
anticipate
świata,
another production facility
ale
at a
naszym
different site
standardowym
in another part
planem
of the
jest,
world, but our
wytwarzanie w naszym
baseline plan is to keep manufacturing on the premises.
Kolejne pytanie traktuję jako
And
bezpośrednio
the next
związane
question
pewnie z kwestią
is mostly
partneringową,
about
ale
partnering,
pojawiła się kwestia
but
tego, ile mamy
how
spotkań
many
zaplanowanych na
meetings
najbliższej konferencji
do you
JP Morgan?
plan at the upcoming JP Morgan conference?
No, tych spotkań
Oh,
jest
there are
dużo.
quite many.
Praktycznie JP Morgan zaczyna
JP
się
Morgan
dzisiaj,
conference
do
starts
piątku,
today
więc
and
spodziewamy
it will
codziennie
go on until Friday, and
5-7
every day we have 5 to 7 meetings scheduled.
Czekamy na
Thank
Państwa
you. We are still looking
pytania.
forward to your questions.
Widziałem wczoraj przyszły pytania.
Yesterday, I took a note of some early questions, and these were mostly focused on statistics.
Jest i kolejne
And there is
pytanie,
another
nie
one.
wiem, czy przejdziemy
So
przez
shall we
statystykę,
take statistics
czy to
first,
w jakiś
or
sposób- Dobrze.
the question? Okay.
Może tak. Mogłabyś
Tak, pomóc? Jasne.
So the
Pierwsze
first
pytanie,
question
brzmiało,
is,
badanie objęło 89
there were 88
pacjentów.
patients enrolled
Jakie
in this
wartości
study.
punktów w skali Matrix
What were the
Smith-Maxwell na początku
baseline
badania?
MADRS
Jaki był przedział
total
tych
scores,
punktów początkowych?
and what was the range of
Państwo
baseline
widzieliście,
scores?
Sylwia przedstawiła
Well,
około
Sylvia
29
showed that there were
punktów
like
na starcie baseline
approximately
pacjenci.
92
Przedział był
scores
między
as a
26
baseline.
a 44.
26 to 44 was the range.
Pacjenci średnio bądź ciężko.
Patients had either severe or moderate
Kolejne,
depression.
ile wynosiła poprawa w drugiej używanej w badaniu skali depresji?
What was the improvement
HDS?
on HDRS
Te
scale?
poprawy były na poziomie 4-5.
The improvement was 4 to 5 points. However, I don't see the data in front of me right now, but the improvement overall was statistically significant.
Dlaczego próba
Why
88 pacjentów w przypadku
this-
depresji lekoopornej dwubiegunowej
Why
wystarczyła
88
do wywnioskowania
patients
statystycznego,
was
a
a
w
sufficient
przypadku
number for
jednobiegunowej
bipolar
próba, 89
for
była
bipolar
za
depression to have a statistically significant result, and in case of the unipolar depression, 89 patient was not enough.
Wielkość efektu była
Well,
znacząco
in
większa.
case of the bipolar depression, the size effect size was much greater than in case of unipolar depression study, but we are not able to come up with a straightforward answer to this question at this point.
Wracam do
Okay, let
czatu.
me take the questions from the
Na
chat.
ile szacują Państwo koszt
What is the
trzeciej fazy
estimated
klinicznej
cost of the
Falkieri?
phase 3 trial of the Falkieri
Koszt
product?
badań
The
klinicznych
cost
jest
of clinical
uzależniony
trial
od wielu,
depends on
specyficznych,
many specific
aktywności,
activities,
takich cech, długości badania,
duration of
ilości
the
wizyt,
trial,
zastosowanych różnych
methodologies and diagnostic methods that are followed. So it is not a cost that is easy to estimate, not as easy to come up with as the cost of the Brent barrel on the stock exchange. Without having a lot of data specified, we are not able to come up with the reasonable estimate of the cost. Our primary calculation was that the cost of phase 3 study for each indication should be approximately 40 million euro or slightly more. But as I said earlier, the accurate number will be known when we get quotes
Co jest
from
ważniejszą
the
korzyścią
prospective
szybkość działania,
companies.
czy skuteczność? Czyli jakby
So
dwa
what is
typy
important,
skala redukcji objawów.
the
Konkretna
rapid
depresji dwubiegunowej
acting
wydaje się pokazywać dużo większą.
feature or efficacy?
Nie wiem na podstawie
I'm not sure cariprazine seems to have a higher efficacy. I'm not sure to what kind of studies are you referring here, because to my knowledge it shows much lower efficacy. Cariprazine in 2 weeks is the difference of 2 points on MADRS, and we had a much higher readings. The effect size for cariprazine at the end point was 0.5 as far as I remember, while our reading was going up to 0.9. The Spravato treatment is 6 months and 4 phases. What would be approach to Falkieri, and how the difference in technology affects the manufacturing cost? We are not familiar with the manufacturing costs of Spravato. We are familiar with our cost, and our cost is fully controlled. 80% of inhaler is identical to our Stalmex, so we have a robust cost control. We have large-scale manufacturing facility, therefore we are not concerned about the costs of production. Another question is a follow-up in a sense. What is the production potential for Falkieri in our facility, and what could be the production per year? In case of Salex, as you know, we are able to manufacture several 100,000 inhalers per month. So given our big dreams to sell Falkieri in large volumes, over 100,000 units can be manufactured per month, and we are able to support that. In phase 3, are you going to test 2 doses or 2 doses or 3 doses? At this point, we are not able to answer this question. This is subject to discussions with regulators. We need to remember that in case of the majority of psychiatric agents, we have classical dosing. So perhaps we will have a similar strategy for our study. Our inhaler allows for that. The patient has the ability to regulate the dose by regulating the number of inhalations. What's the source of differences in readouts for unipolar and bipolar studies? We don't know for sure. One of the hypotheses is that esketamine may be more efficacious for bipolar depression. This is the current hypothesis, especially that our studies were done by the same centers, using the same scales, so there is a lot of symmetry between the 2 studies. And in case of the bipolar depression, the results are substantially better than in case of the unipolar depression study. In the phase 3, are we going to look at the placebo or standard of care? Please mind you that in our study, we were actually administering our products in combination with the agent that the patient has been already taking. To my mind, as far as I remember, they were taking antipsychotic products that were approved for treatment. So the patient has a minimum control through the basic fundamental drug that they take. And this is the plan for phase 3. So our agent is administered in conjunction with the therapeutic agent that the patient has already taken. Now, can you give us some insight into the market of therapeutics for resistant bipolar depression? Are there any studies that currently are in process and may actually produce some competitors in a few years? Please mind the fact that there is less happening for the bipolar depression in the clinical world in the world of the clinical studies, and the difference is huge. From the biological point of view, this is a different disease, which is not fully understood. Classical antidepressants are not effective in case of bipolar depression. So this is something that has tremendous market potential. There is a huge market out there, and there was a large number of failures recorded over the past few years. So it seems what we are having right now is likely to be a unique solution. We are continuing to take your questions through the chat, but I cannot see anything new.
Jeszcze pytanie w nawiązaniu
One more question.
Czy leki stosowane lub badane w depresji
Are
lekowej dwubiegunowej
drugs
mogą
approved
być
for
potencjalnie
bipolar depression
obecne również na rynku depresji
can be also present in the unipolar depression market? This is a theoretical question because regulators request clinical evidence of efficacy for one indication or another. Therefore, we cannot just say that we will use bipolar depression products to treat the unipolar depression or to get the approval.
Powtarza się pytanie dotyczące leczenia
We have repeated question about the Falkieri treatment, and let me repeat that because I think that we need more. So, Spravato takes 6 months to treat and 4 sessions. What is the sequence anticipated for Falkieri? The treatment takes 2 parts. First, induction, which is 4 weeks, and then maintenance treatment, which takes several months or more than 12 months. In our case, it will be the same. The induction phase in our study was 2 weeks because we just wanted to show how fast the response can be observed. But in phase 3 trial, the induction phase will take 4 weeks, and then maintenance treatment that would take several months of over 12 months. Maintenance treatment is long-term, and here we want to do everything that needs to be done so that the regulators approve the product for qualified patients that can self-administer the product in home settings. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we exhausted the questions. This is the last call. Okay, we are having one more question. Do you consider separate partnering for European market and US markets, or you're looking for one partner to cover both markets? Well, this is one of the scenarios that we are considering. One partnering for the US market, separate partnering for Asian markets, and yet separate partnering arrangement for the European market. But in case of the European market, Celon Pharma considers to be an ideal partner for that.
Dziękuję. Szanowni Państwo,
Thank you.
pytanie. Czy podanie leku odbyło się w finalnej wersji inhalatora? Was
the product administered in the final version of the inhaler with the software included? Well, that will be decided. The decision will be made for the phase 3 trial. In phase 2, we were administering the same product that will be administered in phase 3.
Szanowni Państwo, Śledzę
I'm
przeglądam
still
czat,
watching the
widzę
chat
więcej pytań
to
niż
find more
na moment.
questions, but I do not see any.
Panie prezesie, to może ja poproszę o krótkie
So perhaps I
podsumowanie
will
i
ask
czasu
our
jeszcze
CEO
później
for a
kolejne
brief
pytania,
wrap-up,
ale to do zasady będziemy
and
pomału
we
zmierzać
are
do końca naszego spotkania.
going to wrap up the meeting, unless there are some last-minute questions.
Mhm. Szanowni Państwo, nagranie z dzisiejszej telekonferencji będzie dostępne na naszej stronie internetowej.
The recording of this conference will be available on our
Również,
website.
jeżeli czujecie Państwo, że po przejrzeniu czy też
Once
przeanalizowaniu
you
wyniku
review
badania,
the results of
pojawiły
the
się
study,
dodatkowe kwestie, na które
you may have
chcielibyście
some
znać
additional
odpowiedź,
questions.
zapraszam do zadawania
Please
pytań do działu relacji
raise them
inwestorskich.
with our investor
Nie
relations.
widzę pytań, w
At
związku
this
z tym
point, I
możemy
cannot see any
oficjalnie
further
tą
question. I
część
believe
pytań,
that we may
część sesji
close the
zakończyć.
Q&A
Panie
session.
prezesie, to ja poproszę
Therefore,
bardzo
I would
krótkie
like to ask
podsumowanie
our CEO for a very
i myślę, że
brief
będziemy kończyć
wrap
nasze
up,
dzisiejsze
and
spotkanie.
we will get to the end of this meeting. Well, actually, the summary has already been done. We are very happy with the results of this study. They are way above our expectations. This is a true breakthrough when we look at the results for the bipolar depression treatment. Therefore, I would like to congratulate everyone who was involved in this well-designed and well-carried-out clinical trial. It will certainly have a very important impact on our operations. Thank you very much. Thank you, and we are available to you should you have any further questions.